Well, good morning. As I said, um, I encourage you to open up your week 2 work. That's that worksheet, your assignment, in other words. So that way, when I'm teaching you today, you can go ahead and add answers for your assignment. In good news, most of you in this hour have your first week's work in. So that's awesome. All right, so let's talk about what you can expect. So today in class, I'm going to go over the checklist, schedules, and talk a little bit about CTA vote. Then I'm going to teach. So I'm going to teach you the following things today. Table topics. What are they? How's that going to work? Conversational skills, interview, code switching, and then finally active listening. So those 5 things we're going to learn about today. I'm also going to preview for you a slide that has optional resources. So you can either review, learn more, or challenge yourself with any of these topics. That's today. Tomorrow, day 2, you can expect that we are going to do 3 practices with the table topics. And on the slides, slide 25 through 28, it explains how that will work. And I, of course, will explain in class tomorrow. I'm going to put the suggested topics on the screen tomorrow to help you time out your work and so you can just see them at a glance. You already have all the topics. They are in your week 2 folder and it says Sp2 table topics. So today we're going to learn, tomorrow we're going to practice it. As always, your week 2 work, you have one handout, just like you do every week, and that's going to be due Friday before midnight, just like always. Even though we don't have class Friday due to registration, I kept the due date the same. I don't know about you, but I like consistency. All right, so your checklist for this week. So we're going to learn about the 4 main concepts, more like 5 because of table topics. And then you're going to practice and fill out prompts on both of those things. So here's the schedule with registration due dates and what have you. So your registration form is due in homeroom tomorrow. Okay, I said I would talk to you briefly about a CTA. So you've all had me before. You've heard these stories before. So this week, one of the things you get to do on your handout is you get to vote. Do I want a CTA live every week or not? I'm game either way. I've included, and you can see on this slide, I've included in your work this week, just for funsies, because that's what we do with CTAs, I've included 3 examples that I already have filmed on YouTube. So you can have an informed vote, or if you just need a break, watch a silly story, there you go. There's 3 of them for you. Okay, so now I'm going to start talking about what we're learning this week. And again, you can put answers right on your week 2 handout as we go. So first, what the heck are table topics? All they are conversation starters from this book by Matthew Arnold Stern called Mastering Table Topics. So instead of last year we had an idea sheet, so that had like 20 topics on it, this gives us more topics. That's essentially what it is. You are welcome to use the book in the room as well. Since you're hybrid, just keep it in there. So here's how we'll use table topics, 4 different ways. 2 of them are this week, and then the next 2 are in week 4. So this week, we'll use table topics for conversational skills and for interview skills. In the future, we'll use it for PD legs practice and impromptu skills. So here's an example of a table topic slide. So this would be under the category personal values. And you'll get to pick, you and who you work with, you get to pick, whenever you have a slide like this, which question or questions do you want to answer? Choice is very important in speech. All right, so conversational skills. So you use these every day if you're a successful human. And that's at work, school, friends, every day. So a couple things to keep in mind about conversational skills. So usually the best talks involve people who are at a shared level of emotional intelligence or experience. In other words, we tend to talk better naturally with people who are like us, who are on the same level, who have the same kind of background. One good thing about conversational skills is they often overlap interview skills, because in both conversation and an interview, you're trying to listen and you're trying to adapt your responses to the people talking. Code switching and active listening, you need both of those for conversational skills and interview. So I'm going to teach you those today. So there at the bottom, you can see too long, didn't read. All right, interview. So interviews are often stressful for people because they have a clear purpose. You're trying to get a job, you're trying to get a school spot, you're trying to get something out of an interview. One way to make it less stressful is keep in mind you need two main skills for interviewing. Active listening. So you have to know that you get what question is being asked before you can answer. And code switching is where you adapt to a cultural environment. And you do that with your word choices, your language, your tone, and your body language. So in the case of an interview, you're trying to adapt to the cultural environment of either the place you want to go work or the university you want to attend. You're trying to fit in other words, trying to make a good impression. A little bit more about interview. There's two main questions that happen either in job interviews, school interviews, or even interviews for television, what have you. And you'll get to try out some of these questions next week. You'll have an option to either interview one another for your introduction speech or to not. But here's what those questions look like. They're open versus closed. Generally, open is better for interview because you get more responses. So as you can see on the screen, closed is where you have a question that's designed to get a one-word answer, just a quick, simple answer, yeses or nos often. So for example, and this is what I used to use to teach this in your book, did you like the pep assembly? Most people are just gonna answer, yeah, no, it's all right. You're not gonna get a lot of info from that kind of closed question. Open, you get a more detailed answer typically. So for example, tell me your thoughts on the PEP assembly. Notice thoughts are plural. A lot of time if you add a plural to a closed or to an open question, people add more. So in the next two slides, I'll just have you can either out loud with someone else or just in your mind, see if you can identify open versus closed. And of course, I'll give you the answers. So which one of these questions are open and which ones are closed? So I'll read them, decide the answer again, either out loud or in your head, and then I'll move on to the answers. So how is the season going? Who taught you the most going into this year's meet? Describe your favorite part of Footloose. So which ones are open and which ones are closed? Take a moment. All right, let's do some answers. So how is the season going is a more closed question because you can easily answer it with one word, just good, bad, I. Who taught you the most going into this year's meet? Also closed because it elicits just a one-person answer. Describe your favorite part of Footloose. That one is open because it has them describe a specific part. So they're not just going to typically go all of it. Because you've told them to describe, they can give more details. That's the idea. So that's open and closed for interview. Let's talk about code switching. So for this one, I'm going to share a couple of examples from real life. So some silly examples from my life after I define this for you here. All right, so code switching, as I had said earlier, is where you adapt your language and your tone to suit the cultural environment. A lot of times this includes body language. We do this all the time. We just don't know that it's called code switching. Most successful people code switch every day. If you've ever worked customer service, you've done code switching. If you aren't in jail right now, odds are pretty good you've done code switching. You've adapted to the cultural environment and modified what you're going to say to stay out of trouble. So let me give you some examples from life. For example, My grandma, I grew up on a farm, as many of you know. So my grandma was a very proper lady. I loved that about her. Very careful language, very sweet, except not in every environment, in most, except the barn. When we were working out in the barn, the code switch was different. I remember very clearly at like 5 being completely shocked. Please pardon me getting close to a swear here. I was completely shocked because one day I'm working with her out in the barn, and it was one of the first times I was out there without my mom, and I must have gotten her away because she told me to move my fat ash. The shock, you guys. Grandma doesn't talk like that. And then she followed up with, I don't got time to be nice in the barn. We're here to work. All right. So I learned to adapt by watching the adults around me. A lot of times that's how we learn code switching. I learned to adapt by watching the adults around me. How do you behave in the barn? How do you talk out there? How do you act? Mostly on the job, short answers, sometimes a little swearing. Same thing in my dad's garage. My dad was a mechanic. So shop talk. He would often remind us kids if we had been working in the garage with him. Now remember, where does shop talk stay? And we're like, in the shop. And he's like, that's right. Don't be repeating the things you heard out there to your mother. Because, people would talk very loose out in the shop. There's very colorful language. I'll give you a last example of code switching. So whenever we have to use a different language, that's code switching. Or even a language that's technically ours but isn't. So for example, I studied my 3rd year in college in Northern England. Technically, the language is the same. It's English, but dialect-wise, no, it is not. I had to do a lot of code switching when I moved to Northern England. I had to learn what's appropriate behavior here versus what's appropriate behavior in America. I'll give you an example. So in Northern England, you know how in the Midwest we'll ask, how are you today? And everyone answers, I'm okay, how are you? Even if you're having a bad day, you never go, bad. You just say, can't complain, I'm all right, how are you? In Northern England, they don't even bother with that pleasantry. They don't even bother with, I'm all right, how are you? Someone will go, hi, yeah, all right. And then the answer is ta. The word ta in Northern England is definitely code switching, or it definitely was for me. I learned that ta was used for I'm okay, thank you, and you're welcome. So they use ta all over the place. Ta, all right. So that's code switching. And the trickiest thing about code switching is whether or not you have to do it, whether or not you want to do it. Another way of explaining this is code switching can be tricky because you want to still be yourself. You're just adapting you for that environment. And sometimes that's a little culturally, what's the word I want to use? Culturally fraught? It really depends. So let's talk about active listening. And this is the last thing I'll teach you today. And then we'll preview optional resources and talk a little bit about answers for your handout. So active listening at first, I'm going to be honest, it sounds really weird when you first start doing it. It sounds like you're slow or you just don't understand the world. But what active listening is, and this is something that, again, good talkers do instinctively. So active listening is where you show the speaker that you're listening. And you do that with your body. You do that by asking questions. You do that with a couple of techniques. So the main thing for active listening is the listener is quiet until the speaker has finished talking. Some of us, and I'm used to be so guilty of this, some of us wait to talk instead of actually listening to the other person. So a key part of active listening is full on listen. Make sure you're understanding exactly what this person is trying to convey. Then you summarize it back to them. Now you don't just, if they tell you, yeah, I'm having a really hard time, as my dad is an addict, and they go on like that, you don't want to go, so I'm to understand that your dad isn't, you don't want to do it that stilted, but you do want to give feedback that shows, hey, I'm listening and I get what you're saying. So how does active listening look? Here's a couple ways you know you're doing it. First off, show you're listening with nonverbal cues. That means eye contact. That means turn your body towards them. That often means leaning in, just showing with your whole body and face, hey, I'm paying attention to what you're talking about. And of course, that means put your phone away. I don't know if you've experienced this where you're trying to talk to someone about something that's important to you or your feelings, and they're just, yeah, I know, right? And you're like, put it down, I'll brain you with it. As I said earlier, another way you can tell you're doing active listening, another thing to look for is adding information to show, hey, I'm listening. So that's either restating what they said, asking questions, or paraphrasing things. Finally, another way you can tell you're doing active listening is, are you being supportive? And I'm a couple ways you can show that. Again, we talked about body language. Put life into your eyes, put warmth into your voice. Show with your tone, I'm with you. And then this is the tricky part for some of us. Keep your own opinions out of the listening process. When it's time for you to talk, of course give your opinion, but don't get bogged down in someone saying an opinion that you don't agree with. Okay, so here's some optional resources for you, and you can use any of these links to either learn, review, or to challenge yourself. The ones I think are especially good are the challenge ones, but I'm biased. I set them up. All right. So at this point, I want to just show you a couple answers so you can get started in your work for today. You'll also be able to preview the table topics and the steps for tomorrow so you know what's happening. So you can start making choices now. All right, so here's the rubric as per usual. So you get 4 points this week for answering the prompts for today's learning and 6 for answering the prompts for the practice tomorrow. Here is where the CTA vote is. So you can just click which box applies to you. And just like last week, I'll have you write at each star to complete your task to show you're good to go. And just like last week, I'm not grading you on full sentences. I'm grading you on content. Are you showing you learned? Are you showing you're thinking? All right, so you're welcome to work on these together today. Just keep social distancing in mind. So for each below, write one thing you learned or wondered, or an example to show your learning for each one. So for example, conversational skills. I wrote, and you can take this answer, you can take both these answers I'll give you. Code switching and active listening are key to these skills. So that's the main thing I learned about conversational skills. All right. Actually, I'll give you 3 examples today. And then for interview, as you can see, I wrote code switching and active listening are involved here too. Also open versus closed questions. And then finally, for code switching, I wrote a question, which you absolutely can do. So if you have this question, you can write it down. So I wonder, how do I do this without sounding or coming across as fake for code switching? There's really good answers to that on the resource link that I showed you. The short answer is, how do I do code switching without sounding fake? Don't be fake. Be yourself. You're just adapting yourself for a situation. All right, so that is your work for today. I just wanted to show you one more thing. In your week 2 file, you have this slide set. So these are all the table topics that we're going to use this week. I may add more for the following weeks, but these are the ones we're going to use for this week. So your first conversation, you're going to decide between the topics of New Year's, as you can see on the screen here, or winter. And when you use these, you'll have options of, do I want to just focus on one question or a couple of them? Then we're going to practice, and this is tomorrow. So first practice, winter, or I'm already forgetting, New Year's. Interview practice. So these we're going to respond as if we're being interviewed for a job or an interview or a university position we want. So you're going to answer a question on personal values. There's quite a few of these are used in interviews. Or courage, so you get to choose. For interview, you get to choose courage or personal values. And then the final talk tomorrow, you folks are going to get to pick whatever slide you want. So for the final practice, pick whatever topic you want. 2 to show you, opposing view. It's a bit more of a challenge. And then life stages. So you folks, I'm going to put this back to where we need it. You folks have the rest of the time to work on this. Like I said, you can talk to one another and feel free to preview. Feel free to preview your table topics. As always, I'm going to stay in the meet till the end, so sign on if you need help. You got this.